All right, hopefully I am live and chatting to all of you. Let me introduce myself. So I am Simon Paine, and I am a level 2 running coach, a pose level 2 running coach, and I teach basically technique of running. The idea of trying to get people to run better is essentially all that I do now. A little bit of personal training on the side too, but it's essentially trying to get people to form a better opinion of running, essentially. So how can I get you to be a bit more insightful into how you run and maybe establish better answers to some of those longing questions, like why do I have these injuries so often, and what footwear is the best footwear, because you can see on the outset it seems quite daunting seeing all these footwear examples in the store and then running magazines telling you a certain option. So I'm going to try and clarify some of that, how to run better, but also, you know, how to maybe just be a little bit more honest about what it is to run. So yes, I am live, thank you. Okay, so let me start with a bit about me, I guess. So I've done a lot of running. I have run since I was, I don't know, probably an infant. As soon as I could get up, I started running. And then I established a better running form when I was at school, and I developed my training and competed generally at school level. And then I managed to win a few races and realised I was quite good at speed as well as distance, which was great. And then I took on university sports, and I did a sport and exercise science degree, which didn't necessarily work, which is a bit annoying. Trying to focus on mid-strike run at the moment, don't know if this is the best way. Oh gosh, yeah, you're going to have to listen to this. It's a fantastic insight onto that. And yeah, I didn't know how I was running, actually. That's the interesting point. So up till university, sports science degree, I still had no real concept of how I was running, despite all my knowledge that I was gaining over and over. On other sports, I even did ultimate frisbee whilst I was at uni, which I thought was quite interesting, but never actually learnt how to run, which was, yeah, a little bit of a surprise, I guess. At the time, I didn't really think about it. I just thought I run as I run, and I was winning, so why not just keep going as I am? I wasn't suffering any injuries either, so that didn't really spur me to have a look into it any deeper. I then managed to apply for a job in London, and the guy there was also a pose coach, and he told me that I could potentially run better. Took a bit of an insult to start with, and then he did a video of everybody. We all ran past the camera, and as soon as I saw myself in slow motion, that was a bit of a kicker for me. There was not necessarily that I was bad, if that is the word for it, but it was more that I hadn't realised there was more I could have still done in my running style. It was, you know, it was sort of daunting on me that I'd done all these years up till now, not really knowing for sure if I was running at my absolute potential. I just thought fitness was my maximum potential. So as soon as I did my 5k or 10k, I thought, yeah, nailed that distance with that time, therefore I must be this good. But it was absolute nonsense. There was so much more about my running, especially with just perceiving myself running properly, that I thought there was way more I could learn. So I took that on board, did the level 1 pose course, then did level 2 a couple of years later, where I met the founder of this whole technique. And with all that insight, just the last 14 years have just been telling people about what I consider the truth about running technique, which can sometimes be a bit daunting for some people, because like me, I'd been doing it all these years and then been told you're not necessarily as good as you think. And so it is a bit of a truth to a lot of nonsense out there, I guess. And I'm going to clear up some of that as we go through now. So what I teach, the pose running technique, is basically off the back of pose method. So a gentleman in 1970s, late 1970s, called Dr. Nicholas Romanov, he came up with this pose running style off the back of a concept of pose method. So pose method being I can move in a certain way and I have a structure to how I move and I see things clearly through better body positions. And he applied that methodology into running. And that was his first approach of all sports. He now coaches into weightlifting, golf, tennis, anything really. As long as it's moving, he can apply his concept to that. But running was really the one that he wanted to give as much insight as he could, because at the time, and even now, I would probably argue, not many people still really think about running technique, and it is mind-blowing. So if you're watching this, you're going to be one of a handful to really get a good understanding, at least of what we might be pushing forward for now, rather than just holding back with our basic interpretation of pose, or just running in general. So, the definition of pose is efficient, injury-free movement taught through poses. So we're trying to say, look, we can reduce as much injury potential as possible by making you run in the most effective way and most efficient way. And we're going to try and do that through really effective body positions. He's been doing this, Dr. Romanov, since 1970, like I said, and now really developed this pose running into America. That's where he kind of moved to from Russia. And they've established a lot more of it over there into their CrossFit gyms, which is fantastic. So all CrossFit pretty much does is follow pose running as their standardized approach. And the US Army also now have that as part of their, okay, this is how we're going to teach people to run, which is really cool. It shows that the movement itself is changing, so that's good. What I find really interesting is if I ask a lot of people, especially those that even come to see me, have you even heard of running technique? The answer is generally no, and that's a little bit of a worry. So it's really kind of like asking the big question is, why have we still got this, I suppose, quiet voice on what to do with running? And there's probably a few different answers you could talk about. Generally, people say they can't even be bothered to learn to run because they think they can already do it, which is mildly true. You can run, but you can run really badly. So if it's running badly that you want, then great, go for it. If you want to learn to run to a more effective style, then that is very doable. And that is what I'm there to do, is to say, look, I could jump in a pool and splash around. Do you call it swimming? Don't know, until I'm moving forward. But even if I'm moving forward and splashing around, is that still good swimming? No. Once I start learning the elements of where my hand placement goes, how I kick, that's probably swimming. And it's more effective. And just because someone told me how to do it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to do. It's just a really effective way of getting what was a movement that was sort of, tried to be learned on the spot by that person. And then we took biomechanics and said, look, there's a better way of doing it. How about we place your hand here? How about we put your position in this style and see if it's more effective? And voila, there you go. You've got an efficient movement that hopefully causes less injuries, etc., etc. And that is essentially what I'm, hopefully going to give you some insight into, and what I've been doing for the last 14 years. And it's been really powerful. Not only changed my running movement myself, but changed hundreds of other people's. And it's got a lot more, I guess, emphasis to come with teaching more of the public. So what I want to do is also wonder, I suppose, why people are even afraid to change. I think a lot of the time it might be that if you have an injury already, you might feel like you're just going to make it worse. Or you might have read that it could cause you an injury by changing, and I think that's a bit scary in itself. So I am there to kind of give you that confidence to say, look, just because we're changing something doesn't mean that it could be a bad thing or that it could be ineffective initially. A lot of people that have come to see me will have an instant change. Some people don't have that instant change. It might take a few days. But the fact that you can get an instant change and make something really effective very quickly should be a kind of a motivation as opposed to something to be scared of. Like learning something can feel like it might be scary, but actually when you feel the benefit, it seems really motivating. And I think, just seeing my sister's joined us. Hello, Sarah. She's a good example of when I taught my sister how to run. She initially had this kind of like, this is a bit weird, and then it kicked in and she had that click moment of how it felt. And ever since then, kind of been building on it and progressing. And it wasn't like she was going to get those results straight away, but it was the fact that she had the potential to grow with something that could be injury-free and could give her better times, go faster, go further, all that stuff. Rather than just sit in a place where you've got injuries or you haven't got injuries, but you can't really progress down the effective side of it. You're only going to work on your fitness, and that's a bit of a problem for me. I suppose where it all starts is if we think about probably if you think about when we were tribes people and we had to hunt down animals, you can think about not only the length of time it took to hunt down animals. There's a great video on YouTube about the persistent hunt with David Attenborough, but you can find we would chase animals for around 8 hours. We would, potentially walk, run, and out of that essence of running, you can discover that actually we are probably the best people, the best movement for us is to run, and that if you take any other sport, we're probably not as good as running because we have that capacity as it's our foundational movement. So if you are suffering injuries, it seems a bit of a waste to think, right, I'm going to just leave it at that. But actually, you should know that your body is capable of definitely running, and it's capable of definitely running injury-free for hours. And that might seem a little bit over the top right now, but it is actually a real thing. Hence why people grow into doing marathons, ultra marathons. There's not only a motivation to want to push themselves, but after a while the body starts to learn that it can cope with this environment of repetitive movement on its legs. We've got these Achilles, we've got these glutes, and these muscles really help us to move across the ground in a horizontal manner. That why can't we benefit from that? And why should we be the people that maybe suffer with an injury or can't even breathe properly when we run? We need to know that we've got a capacity already from an evolutionary standpoint to get to where we're at. And that's really interesting for me. So I think, if you think about also the fact we're born barefoot, it might be a clue there that, okay, do we even start to need shoes when we run? And that in itself could be quite an interesting topic. I've actually got some examples here. So this is a barefoot shoe because there's no cushioning whatsoever. And what I used to train in, you might have seen these weirdo shoes, Vibram 5 Fingers. And these are plimsolls. These are the things I trained in for 2 years when I learnt this technique. Not because I was already running barefoot or anything. I was actually running in quite well cushioned shoes when I learned this. And then I decided to drop to these because I wanted to understand the concept of what it's like to be on the ground. What is it to land midfoot? What is it to land heel strike? What is it to land forefoot? You can't know that unless you've got exposure. So barefoot is really an essential way for our body to go, look, here's the ground. If it's really hard, am I going to heel strike on that ground? Probably not. A lot of people find their answers, and I don't even need to coach you this. If you want to take your shoes off and go for a run on the road right now, you'll probably find you're going to change your running gait. Whether it's you run differently upright, you change your cadence, you change where your foot might be landing. All that interesting stuff is exposed really early on just by having no footwear. And that is kind of key for how your body wanted to develop as a baby into walking to running. It needed to know this is the ground, this is a sharp object, I need to shift my weight from one side to another so I don't put my foot through it. If it's hot, I need to pick my feet off the ground a little bit more. And all these things give you a proprioception to, okay, maybe I should be changing my walking gait due to the ground around me rather than me trying to put a shoe on and be numb to that effect. So it's important to know that we can build a lot of our running style just based on being more exposed, but that itself is not the key to running technique. It's just a great idea for saying, right, here's a drill. I want to have a learning experience through exposure and experience of just knowing what the ground is like sometimes, rather than just guessing. And shoes that have more cushioning, and this is one example, will start to feel like, okay, I'm not feeling the ground as much, but if I can have maybe a even heel to forefoot, at least I'm going to be balanced when I try to run or walk. If you have, I laughed at the look of your hand shoe. Yeah, I did the marathon in these bad boys. It was good fun. Had to be a caveman, so it was a little bit more appropriate. Anyway, with cushioning, it's fine as long as they've got a bit of heel to toe evenness. What you might find with a lot of people's shoes is the heel is a lot thicker than the forefoot, and all that is doing is giving you a slight incorrect perception of balance. So your heel is going to be higher, you're basically walking around in high heels. Is that effective for learning how to walk or how to run? No. And does it just shorten your calf? Probably. If you've ever talked to anyone who wears high heels a lot, and I don't do it that often, I'm afraid, what happens is you can tell that they have a quite short calf when they take them off. They don't like to stretch the back of their foot, and they walk slightly differently. And even their toning of their calf is different. You might find it slightly more developed. So it can really affect the way you move. So for me, I'm trying to look at not only trying to think, do we need cushioning, but also can we just be more balanced within our footwear, because that's going to make a huge difference. Okay, so the basic premise with pose method would be to start you off generally with minimal footwear. We'd talk about drills that could get you into perception of, okay, how's this landing? How can we move from this landing? And then we might add footwear, because then it becomes more of a normal thing for you. A lot of the time, people are worried that I'm just going to be teaching them how to run barefoot, and that is not necessarily a good thing, especially if you do run in any rocky area. All you're going to do is just try and hop out of the way of rocks every 3 seconds. But what I want to do is give you the perception and the potential to be able to choose which footwear you have. So a lot of the drills kind of start minimal, and then we build up to footwear so you know the difference between the two. Another interesting concept might actually be the supination and pronation effect. If you've ever been in a running store, they might have put you on a treadmill, videoed you from behind and gone, right, you supinate or you pronate and you overpronate, and there's this real notion straight away that overpronation sounds bad, therefore I need some help, please give me your £150 shoe, I need to waste my money. And so you do that and you get your shoe, they throw an orthotic in it, or they just give you one that's got a really nice thick middle to it, and it stops your foot from rolling in, which is that pronation effect. Supination is when your foot turns to the outside, pronation is when it drops inwards. And what happens then is your foot is balanced once it's in the shoe, but as soon as you start moving, all that connection above it from knee, hip, all the way up to shoulders and head, all that has been affected. So you've learned over a long period of time to walk without this, with this overpronation, and then also you put a wedge in the way, everything up that chain is going to be affected. So instead of you actually removing an injury, you just send potential injury elsewhere. Your knee is now going to be moving in a slightly outward movement because the foot has been pushed to an outward position so it doesn't drop in. Your hip is then also counterbalancing your knee, your shoulders counterbalance your hips, and obviously your head will try and balance on top of that. So it's not necessarily fixing the problem, and a lot of the time I get that from people who come to see me, that their footwear is just moved an injury, or it's still not satisfactory to what they want to benefit from. So I would suggest being a bit more exposed if you're not already, trying to get out there, try a bit more barefoot work, and then start to develop your perception of what is good ground, what's bad ground, how do I change my walking gait, then even if I was running on hard ground, how could I change my running gait? Okay, so what would be probably the biggest difference between pose technique versus any other? I'm not sure if any of you have heard of any other techniques, but there is other things like chi running, Alexander technique, evolution running, and a lot of these, in fact pretty much all of them, except for pose, they would be probably better defined as forms. And what I mean by that is a form is a descriptive way of running. So you might be watching someone and go, yeah, that looks good, thereby I'm going to either teach myself that or coach someone else that. It's not really based on science, and it doesn't really have a standardized approach. Even though you saw it and you wanted to emulate that, there isn't really a standardized way of getting to that point. You just try your best. So what pose method does, or pose running, it says, right, we're going to create a standardized approach, we're going to break it down, and what we're going to do then is make sure you can follow that standard so you get to a good place, or the best place you can be with all the training. And it's also based on science. So with pose method, what he did was he took a heel striker. This was quite early on, sorry, quite a lot of traffic here. And he took a heel striker on a force plate analysis, and whilst they ran heel strike, he ran his best version of pose, and he was landing more forefoot, midfoot, and the difference was about 50% less impact going through his knee, and that was quite a considerable amount. So he looked into it further, did a lot more research. There's a good 6, 7, if not 8 now, published bits of research within pose method and how to run and the benefits of running via pose technique. And the way he creates a standardized effect is by saying, look, there's one really good body position that we're going to try and emulate, and then what we're going to do is break that down and get you to do drills that specifically maintain that position so that you can almost just put it into practice and then not have to think about it. To start with, that sounds quite tricky for people, because you're going to want to just go for a run, put the music on, forget that there's any actually running technique out there. But actually, if you just commit to probably 2 weeks initially, and then try and push towards 2 months of training, of just focusing on your running, maybe videoing yourself and things like that, you'll actually get a much better result, because what you're doing is you're giving yourself a better interpretation, but you're practicing the drills enough that you just seem to do it more autonomously. And that is really key for any runner. You know, we're all autonomously have built ourselves to think we're either heel strikers, midfoot, forefoot, whatever it is. Most people don't really know how they run. I've asked them many a time, and there is no real, I don't know, I'll probably just do this or I just do this. And that's slightly worrying, especially if you are a keen runner who does it 2 or 3 times a week. It's really worth knowing just how you actually run. So with pose method, we try and make it a standardized approach, which means you can build that, get the drills right, then take it up to strength and conditioning, maybe look at speed drills, maybe look at endurance drills, you can look at nutrition, you can look at everything else, but we're creating a standard that you can follow. And that's very hard to do with all these other running techniques. Because of the form that they try to describe, it's not possible to learn them perfectly or even have a great result from, because it's too much interpretation of your own and not the actual interpretation of what we're trying to get across. So it is worth obviously having a coach, but at the same time, even if you just read the book and you look at the examples of what we're trying to achieve, it's very specific to what we want. It's not just a vague description, oh yeah, try and get your hips forward. If I said to 100 people, just push your hips forward, they'd all do it differently. But what I want is a very specific amount of hip forward. I want a specific amount of posture, I want a specific amount of lift of the foot, landing of the leg, hand position, cadence, all these other things. So that is the ultimate aim of any technique. If you think about any sport, there's a technique to it generally, and they all have this right direction towards. I want to, for example, in swimming again, I want to be able to put my hand in the water in a certain way. I want to be able to move my arm in a certain way, turn my body in a certain way, maybe move my head in a certain way, whatever it is, the technique gives you that approach to specificity with hopefully some scientific evidence to prove that it works. And that's what pose method basically is for me. Let's have a look here. So the other difference probably with why this running style might differ from all the others is that it not only touches on the science, but it touches on the psychology of how we run. And I found this the most interesting when I did my level 2, is that most people think of themselves as running in a certain way, even though they can't describe it. They still think of themselves running in a certain way, and it's based on probably like a running magazine or something they've been told by somebody else. And that image that they start creating becomes how they run and defines how they run, more so than if they just tried something else. So if I show people, for example, 3 or 4 different runners, you might picture one and go, right, that's probably me right there. But that in itself is still giving you a sense of validity that it's not even true. So most people run more similarly than they do differently. And there's a point in time that everyone needs to start focusing on when they run. And that is usually the bit where they're in the middle of their fall when they run. So a lot of people don't know this, but whenever you're moving, you're just falling with gravity. Running is a product of just falling and your legs keeping up with falling. A lot of description of running is, oh, I use my legs to push off, I use my legs to drive, and I use my legs to get up the hill. But actually that's not really true. You're just falling and your legs will try and recover the fall wherever you're going. If you do decide to push, you might then find yourself going upwards, because you can only push against the support that is at the angle of your foot. So if the floor is underneath me and I push, all I do is go up. If the foot is slightly behind me and I still try and push, I'm still going up. But what I want to do is still go horizontally. That's my ultimate aim. I want to fall horizontally to the ground. So essentially what we're trying to do is get you to perceive yourself as falling more effectively. And if people, going back to the description part, if I could get you to picture yourselves in a better body position as you lean, that might change everything about your running gait, because you'll be aware of your balance a lot more. And really, pose method is, in a nutshell, just about the balance phase. So the picture part becomes quite an interesting concept. So I need to change your whole mindset around, right, how you think about yourself running has to be almost completely different to what you thought. We do a lot of video analysis in what I coach, so that you can see your transition from whatever style you are doing in towards pose running technique. And it really helps people to kind of have that, okay, this is a true and honest description, or maybe representation now, of what I actually do, and not some sort of form or description that someone told me or what I was thinking. And running magazines are a little bit misleading too, because they always show people with their legs apart, heel striking, or maybe toe down too much, or bent over too much. And we start to think of that as, oh, that must be what running is. But actually it's just what that person happened to be in at that time, and it wasn't necessarily the most important movement within their running. So there's that part. I think also the perception that we don't even think about ourselves running effortlessly. So if running is only about this falling forward, why do we even need to push? What is the strain of running? Why does our heart rate even go up? Most of it is just the okay, I'm capturing my fall moment. But if I wasn't even on the ground that long, then running should be really effortless. And that is a lot about what I try and teach again, is try and do less in your running rather than more. So I'm trying to give you less muscle effort so that you can just let yourself fall somewhere, rather than think about putting my foot on the floor to brake or slow myself down, or even just control my running speed, my pace. And also prevent that push off that I think I need to do if I'm slowing down, I need to get up a hill. Because both of those are completely useless for your running. and they don't need to happen whatsoever. So changing that perception can be quite tricky, but is the biggest part of, probably the biggest part of pose running, because the science bit makes sense to everyone. It's just that psychology part can sometimes be hard to get over because of our habits or what we've learned in the past. Okay, so ultimately, if I was going to summarise pose running, it's to fall forward with the most minimal effort possible and maintain somewhat of a speed. And that is essentially what I'm trying to crack for you when you learn this technique. If you need to, I would go have a look at the research that's done into pose running and see some of the other videos on YouTube of others running pose method, because it's interesting to go, right, that's a different representation to what I thought running was, and that can already set off a little spark within you. Just going back to what Ruth said about the midfoot thing, hopefully I might have talked about it a little bit already and answered a few questions, but your stance, if I was balanced, I'd have a flat foot. If I lift my heel off the ground, I'm actively using the back of my leg, and that uses muscle effort, and I've just said I don't want that, so I would never ask someone to point their foot down towards the ground. I want you to land almost flat-footed, or in a better way to describe it, if you had your foot and you lifted it off the ground and you let it relax, it would just flop like this, and it'd be at this angle. So if I now land on the ground without any active muscle effort, I would just perfectly land near enough the forefoot, but I would also be landing close to the midfoot because there wouldn't be anything resisting the ground. I'd just land almost flat-footed. So the way that I talk about it is, I want people to be landing ball of the foot, but also with a relaxed ankle so it feels a little bit more mid-strike. If you are landing on your heel, it is a hard as hell bone. So if you just jump up and down on the spot right now and you do it, even with cushioned shoes on, it will hurt. Your bone on your heel is not designed to take lots of impact. It is there for walking because you roll across it, but as soon as you add impact to that landing, that bone is going to send shivers up through the knee and into your hip. So that essentially is very bad. Practice jumping up and down the spot. You'll notice you land more on the forefoot. You'll feel that little bit of suspension in your ankle, knee and hip. And all of a sudden you can consider yourselves a little bit more aware of the ground just from that. And that will hopefully change a little bit more of your running gait just by knowing that information. I love this. It's a bit like how it's all in the hips in my crop. Yes. The power comes from that. Yes. Everything should be minimal. Yes. It's interesting you say that. So Dr. Romanov, the way that he came across the pose method was to look at other sports, and martial arts was really key. He says that everything in terms of like ballet, martial arts, they all have these really nice positions or poses that they go through, and it's instinctually from one to another, but it's also very effortless. And that was what kind of triggered him into the response of, why can't we do that in running? Why can't we have a stance in running that we move one to another and it becomes a really effortless movement, rather than it being an effort, which is what a lot of people think about running. They think, have to get a certain time, have to have a certain heart rate, blah, blah, blah. Complete nonsense. You have to fall from one area to another area and just do that with your legs catching up. Now, if I can do that, giving you the best skills and the drills to do that, you're going to do it injury-free. So that is ultimately the aim. It's letting your body react rather than act. So a lot of the time we're acting, we're trying to do stuff in running, that's a problem. I want your body to just to fall with essentially gravity, because that's what's making us fall, and try and have this as a reaction to that. So all I'm doing is let my body work out, okay, this is where I need to support my body weight, and this is now where I can release that body weight so that it's as easy as possible. I would love to show you more, obviously. I'm running a little bit out of time for my next bit, but what I want to do is probably set up a Zoom for going into a bit more detail, the analysis stuff, and a little bit more on the science stuff. So I'll tell you a date coming up that you can sign up to for that. But just in sort of summary, if you think about all movement, that has a skill to it. You can talk about karate, you can talk about swimming, you can talk about tennis, you can talk about anything really. even people now learn how to squat. If you go to a gym, it's, okay, you need to now bend your hips, bend your knees, and have your back straight. It's not just round your back. And so everything in terms of lifting, squatting, pulling, pushing has a skill to it. It's just ultimately we have forgotten about running as an essential part of learning. And it seems to be that, if we already can do it, then don't worry. But then if we did that with every sport, we wouldn't have that many great athletes, I suppose. So if you are looking to be more productive in your running, you want to stay injury-free, you want to feel more effortless, then I'm going to hold a Zoom presentation on Saturday the 6th June, 12 p.m. And that'll be for an hour. And we can talk about all the good stuff. We can even have a look at some videos, which I'll try and do via sharing the screen and things like that. So directly contact me if you want to do that, and we can discuss more about your running specifically too. Okay guys, so I'm going to leave you on that note. I hope it's been somewhat interesting and you've enjoyed some of it. Have a great day. I'll speak to you all soon, hopefully. Bye bye.